Do you have a hard time staying on task? There are a lot of people who supposedly have ADD, and the number of people who've been diagnosed with the disorder has skyrocketed in recent years. Well, the cheeky scientist is one of those people who has a hard time staying focused, and he is here with us today to give us all the tips and tricks to keep us on task. Dr. Isaiah Hankel, welcome back to Smart Life. Good to have you, my friend.
Hello, Dr. Gina. Good to be back.
Good to have you, my friend. Now, do you too recognize the super abilities of ADD and ADHD as they impact people's life differently? Do you see that it's not really just a disability, there are also abilities that people maybe have to go find? Don't you agree?
I do, exactly. And I think it has a lot to do with the way you look at it and how you might channel something like the inability to pay attention to one thing for more than a few minutes or a few hours.
And don't you think, too, this is one of the things I noticed, Isaiah, when I thought of taking medication to hopefully help with my ADHD, I was afraid to lose my super abilities, but I also realized that over my life, I'd done a pretty good job of finding ways to go around the problems of ADD. And that's where I want to focus with you today. You have a great post on your website. Remind me the title of it that has to do with this, something to do with hypochondriasis as well, and ADD. That's your issue, right?
Yeah. It's 17 focus hacks for easily distracted hypochondriacs.
I love that. So tips on actually focusing for those who maybe are just coming to terms with ADD. One of the things that I noticed is that I have to have somebody to help me with the things I'm really bad at, namely things like dates, times, follow-up, directions, things like that I'm not good at. Maybe everybody's abilities are different and disabilities are different, but what are the tricks that you know of that help people stay on task?
Right, and you bring up a couple of good points. The first one is knowing yourself overall and knowing your particular ways of focusing your mind and what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are. I mean, you look at people like Richard Branson, for example, and he's been diagnosed with ADHD 1,000 times and also dyslexic. He's also dyslexic, but he understands what his strengths are and what his weaknesses are. So things like numbers will put his brain literally to sleep, so he outsources that to people that specialize in accounting, for example. And I think that's what you were getting at. So knowing what you should outsource or what you should have other people help you with is a big part of understanding your own focus and your own strengths.
Yeah, I think wherever you can multiply your abilities and sort of diminish your disabilities, that becomes the real trick, knowing where those balances are. And what do you say to the person who just figured out, gosh, I might have ADD or ADHD? What's the first step in sort of accepting that and coming to know their own strengths and weaknesses in that identity?
Right, so the first thing I would say is look at it as a strength and look at it as something you have to channel, not try to stop.
Mm-hmm.
And the first step to doing that is to really just give your brain some space so that you can figure out how it works. And some ways you can do that are by just reducing stimulus. And this can be internal stimulus by reducing your caffeine, sugar, carbohydrate intake, and reducing your external stimulus too. Small things like, maybe spend some time alone, maybe do some meditation. And this will help you really understand how your focus works and how you can guide it and how you can direct it better.
So for people who are listening to us talk about this for maybe the first time they've ever really understood that there are some super strengths, and I call them super strengths because I know that just your standard person isn't gifted with some of the things that some of us with ADD or ADHD are. I watched, just for example, how prolific you are out there in writing your posts and how genius they really are. And I realized that I probably knew you were ADD before you even disclosed that to your audience because that super ability doesn't just come in your average run-of-the-mill person. So for parents out there who are just getting that diagnosis for their child, or individuals out there who are just coming to grips with the fact that they might have this, what is seen by others as a disability, the super abilities fall along what lines? We've talked about my super memory for writing, your super productivity. What are some others?
I think connection's a big one. So the ability to connect a large amount of ideas is definitely a strength. And also the ability to connect very disparate ideas, ideas that are very far apart. For maybe a normal person, you're able to see the links and stuff that other people wouldn't see, right? So, and I think that helps with things like writing or creation. Let's use Steve Jobs as an example. He may not have been ADD, but he made an impression with Apple when he took the things that he learned in a single calligraphy class and applied it to computers. Right? So not a lot of people would see a connection there, but I think you could see that as a super ability in connection. I think ADD people, or people that might be classified as having ADD, have that strength as well.
There's a lot of money, as you know, Isaiah, for to be made from big pharma. The American Medical Association makes a lot of money diagnosing this sort of problem, writing about this kind of problem, prescribing medications for this kind of problem. My question to you is, I have to say that I could see a day where ADD and ADHD are no longer thought of really as a defect, but almost as a separate personality trait. Do you see a day coming where that pivots and it's no longer thought of as something's wrong with you, something's wrong with your child, but just that you think differently, you perceive information differently, you put information together differently? Do you think that day might come?
I do, and I think there's some evidence for that ADD and ADHD, as far as being a disease that requires medication, some medication that's really powerful. We're talking about, amphetamines and things that are pretty potent chemicals. That there's a significant overdiagnosis of this, especially in the U.S. and the U.K., and a lot of clinicians agree on this, a lot of experts agree on this. And at the same time, especially now that entrepreneurship is growing and is something you can do. You used to need a city of factories. All you need is an internet connection now. So with the growth of entrepreneurship and with these type of, ADD people, type A people that make these connections and are productive or have these type of strengths, like you said, like memory and can't sit still, we're seeing these as strengths more and more as these people go on to create billion-dollar empires or million-dollar empires. Again, going back to the example of Richard Branson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does seem like so many people who are successful in life happen to have ADD. It makes you wonder, one of two things has to be true. Either there's a disproportionate number of successful people who happen to have ADD or ADHD, or so many people are diagnosed with it that just almost everyone has it today. Which do you think it is?
I mean, I think it's definitely I think it's the former. I think it's a strength in most cases. It's just something that's very powerful and that a lot of people don't know how to control. And so they make the mistake of letting somebody else define what they have or who they are, or let somebody else define their focus. But if they take the time, and this is where a lot of things from parenting to good mentors to your own self-awareness comes into play. Because if you define yourself and if you define your focus and learn how to control it, it will be seen as a massive strength or a super strength, like you say, and not a disease or a disorder.
So if you take the words attention deficit disorder and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and you take that H factor, that hyperactivity factor, didn't we used to just call that a type A personality? And isn't one of the biggest things, one of the biggest challenges facing someone with the ADHD really just self-discipline and perhaps self-discipline to focus?
Absolutely. I mean, look at the majority of the people that are getting medication for ADD and ADHD are children. And I think it's between the ages of pretty young, 6 and 12, that are being diagnosed. And these are kids, young boys and girls who can't sit still and are having a hard time focusing, also known as a normal kid, right? A normal boy. And a normal
right.
girl.
Yeah.
So I think having high levels of energy, people have different personality types. They have different levels of focus. They have different levels of energy. And trying to make everybody the exact same at some sort of baseline of energy or the ability to focus in the exact same way for every person is definitely a mistake.
Give us some more names of people who have ADD or ADHD that we may have heard of before.
People with ADD or ADHD. Well, I had a quote in the article from the founder of JetBlue, which is a growing jet airline that's doing very well. His name is David, and I think his last name is pronounced Neeleman. And he admits to having ADD, and he says there might be some things that you have to be wary of that come along with that, such as disorganization or the inability to focus at times. But there is also some of these powerful super strengths, as you say, which are creativity and the ability to take on risks. And I think it's very common in the world of entrepreneurship.
And I'm having a little trouble hearing you, but we're on our way out of this segment. Isaiah, I want to thank you so much for being on the show, and we will definitely check you out. The Cheeky Scientist is his name, and my next guest says that the ADD diagnosis is invalid. Stay with us for more Smart Life right after this.